Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the endless stretch of the cosmos, Orpheus glimmered like a beacon of hope. It was humanity's last refuge, a newly discovered planet in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. After centuries of conflict and environmental ruin, Earth was no longer habitable. The remnants of humanity had formed an interstellar fleet, wandering in search of salvation. Now, they had found Ida, or so they hoped. Orpheus was beautiful, a blue-green world with breathable air, fertile soil, and abundant water. But it was far from uninhabited. The leaders of the human fleet knew they had to make a choice, and fast. Two candidates emerged, each with a different vision for the future of Orpheus. Jonathan Gray, a man who had dedicated his life to humanitarian causes, stood on the side of openness and compassion. He believed that humanity should accept interstellar refuge as an alien species displaced by the same conflicts that had driven humans from Earth. His opponent, Dr. Elise Thorne, was a brilliant scientist and a strict isolationist. She argued that Orpheus should be for humans and humans alone. Resources were limited, and humanity couldn't afford to take in others. The debate was fierce. Jonathan's campaign was built on the idea of rebuilding not just humanity, but an entire galactic community. He imagined Orpheus as a sanctuary for all sentient life, where humans and aliens alike could work together to survive and thrive. Elise, however, saw things differently. She pointed to the history of human conflict and mistrust, warning that opening the doors to alien species could lead to chaos. "This is about survival," Elise said in a public debate, her voice cold and precise. "We are not responsible for the galaxy's problems. Orpheus is our last chance. We cannot squander it on a misguided sense of charity." Jonathan's response was calm, but passionate. "We've seen what happens when we turn inward and shut others out. Humanity's history is full of mistakes, but we have the chance to build something new here. Orpheus can be a beacon of hope for the galaxy, not just for us, but for everyone who needs it." The election came down to the wire. Jonathan had his supporters, but fear was a powerful motivator. People were scared of the unknown, scared of scarcity, scared of losing what little they had left. When the results were announced, Elise had won by a narrow margin. Jonathan stood on the platform as Elise was sworn in, the weight of defeat heavy on his shoulders. He had hoped for a different future, one where humanity could rise above its past. But now, with Elise in control, it seemed that fear had won. Yet, Jonathan wasn't ready to give up. He knew that his vision of a united Orpheus, one that welcomed interstellar refugees, was the right path, and he wasn't about to abandon that belief just because the election hadn't gone his way. In the months that followed, Elise wasted no time in implementing her policies. Orpheus' borders were tightly controlled, with military forces patrolling the skies and intercepting any alien ships that approached. The refugees who had managed to reach the planet were forced into camps, their movements strictly monitored. Elise framed it as a necessary measure to protect humanity's future, but Jonathan saw it differently. Behind the scenes, he began organizing a secret network. With the help of a few trusted allies, Jonathan established the Havena, a covert humanitarian operation dedicated to rescuing refugees and providing them with shelter and aid. It was dangerous work, and the consequences of being caught were severe. But Jonathan believed in the cause. He had seen the suffering of the refugees firsthand, and he knew that humanity couldn't afford to turn its back on those in need. It was during one of these missions that Jonathan first encountered the Corans. The alien species had been displaced from their homeworld by a galactic war, and their fleet has been wandering the stars for years, much like humanity's own. When their ship arrived in Orpheus orbit, it was clear that they were in desperate need of help. Jonathan arranged a secret meeting with the Corans' leader, a tall, silver-skinned alien named Vorak. The Corans were wary at first, having been turned away by countless planets before reaching Orpheus. But Jonathan's sincerity won them over. He explained that while the official government wouldn't accept them, the Haven could offer sanctuary. You risk much by helping us, Vorax said, his voice a deep rumble that resonated through the air. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, Jonathan replied simply, and because we're all in this together. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and if we don't help each other, we won't survive. The Corns had something to offer in return. Their technology was far more advanced than anything humanity had, and they were willing to share it. Vorak showed Jonathan schematics for machines that could increase Orpheus' agricultural output tenfold, making it possible to sustain a much larger population. It was exactly what Jonathan needed to convince others to support the Haven. But word of Jonathan's activities was spreading. Elise's government had caught wind of the underground refugee network, and she wasn't about to let it continue. She ordered an investigation into the Haven, deploying security forces to track down those involved. Jonathan's operation was in danger of being exposed, and he knew he had to move carefully. As tensions on Orpheus grew, so did the number of refugees arriving in secret. The Haven was stretched thin, and Jonathan found himself facing internal struggles as well. Some of his allies began to question whether they were doing more harm than good. The camps were overcrowded, and resources were running low. Rumors spread among the human settlers that the refugees were a threat to their safety, and protests broke out in several cities. Jonathan's hope for a peaceful resolution seemed to be slipping away, but he refused to give up. He knew that if he could just hold on a little longer, the Corans' technology could solve many of Orpheus' problems. All he needed was time. Then, one day, an alien fleet arrived in Orpheus' orbita. This time, it was the Talrans, a warrior species known for their fierce combat skills. The Talrans were fleeing a galactic war, much like the Corans, but they were far less willing to cooperate. Jonathan arranged a meeting with their leader, a scarred and battle-hardened commander named Cora. Unlike the Corans, the Talrans were not interested in diplomacy. "We don't need your charity," Cora growled when Jonathan offered sanctuary. "We take what we need, and we fight for the rest." Jonathan knew that if he couldn't convince the Talrans to cooperate, the situation could spiral out of control. The last thing Orpheus needed was a war between humans and alien refugees. But Cora wasn't easily swayed. "What do you want?" Jonathan asked. "You've been fighting for survival, just like us. But there's another way. We can work together." Cora narrowed her eyes. "And why should we trust you? You're weak, and your people are divided." "We're stronger together," Jonathan insisted. "We've already seen what happens when we try to go it alone. If we keep fighting each other, none of us will survive. But if we unite, we can create something better." It was a gamble, but Jonathan knew it was his only chance. He had to make Cora see that cooperation was the only path forward. Cora stared at Jonathan, her expression hard as stone. For a long moment, there was silence. The Talran leader's piercing gaze seemed to cut through him, searching for any sign of weakness or deceit. Finally, she spoke. "If you betray us, human, there will be no place for you to hide. My people will raze this planet to the ground." Jonathan nodded solemnly. "I understand, but if we're going to survive, we need each other." Cora glanced at her subordinates, all of them battle-hardened warriors, their armor scarred from countless conflicts. She gave a curt nod, and the tension in the room eased slightly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Jonathan's team worked tirelessly to integrate the Talrans into their network. It wasn't easy. Cultural differences and distrust ran deep, but slowly, the alien refugees began to cooperate. The Corans' technology, combined with the Talrans' combat expertise, created a powerful alliance. Orpheus had a fighting chance, but the human settlers were growing more restless. Rumors about alien threats spread like wildfire, and Elise's government stoked the flames, pushing a narrative of fear and mistrust. Public protest against the refugee camps intensified, with some turning violent. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before Elise used the unrest as an excuse to crack down on the Haven for good. Then, everything changed. A massive fleet appeared on the edge of Orpheus' solar system, ships belonging to the Zerathian Empire, a ruthless alien race that had been expanding its dominion across the galaxy. The Zerathians were known for their brutal conquests, enslaving entire populations and stripping planets of their resources. Orpheus was their next target. Panic gripped the human settlers, and even Elise, who had prided herself on her iron control, was shaken. The Zerathian fleet was far too powerful for Orpheus' limited military forces to repel. It seemed that humanity's last hope was about to be snuffed out. Jonathan acted quickly. He knew this was the moment that could unite the planet or tear it apart. He reached out to Elise, requesting an emergency meeting. At first, she refused, still furious over his defiance and illegal operations. But with the Zerathian fleet drawing closer by the hour, she had no choice but to listen. The meeting was tense. Elise's face was pale as she sat across from Jonathan in the fortified command center, the weight of the looming invasion heavy in the air. "We're out of time," Jonathan said, his voice calm but urgent. "The Zerathians won't show mercy. They'll enslave us all, humans, Korans, Talrans, everyone." Elise's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she held her ground. "We have our defenses. We've prepared for this." Jonathan shook his head. "Not for this. Not for them. Orpheus can't stand alone, but if we unite humans and refugees, we might have a chance." Elise clenched her jaw. "And you think your ragtag band of refugees can hold off an empire?" "It's not just them. The Korans have technology that could turn the tide. The Talrans are some of the best fighters in the galaxy. If we work together, we can build a defense strong enough to push the Zerathians back." For a long moment, Elise said nothing. The tension in the room was thick, and Jonathan could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on them. Finally, Elise let out a slow breath. "If this goes wrong, it's on your head," she said, her voice tight with reluctance. "But I'll give you what you need." It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was enough. Jonathan left the meeting with a sense of grim determination. The battle for Orpheus was about to begin. The next few days were a blur of preparation. The Korans worked tirelessly to upgrade Orpheus' defense systems, using their advanced technology to reinforce the planet's shields and weaponry. The Talrans drilled with human soldiers, sharing combat strategies and preparing for ground warfare. Even the human settlers, many of whom had been suspicious of the refugees, began to realize that their survival depended on cooperation. As the Zerathian fleet drew closer, the atmosphere on Orpheus shifted. Fear still lingered, but it was joined by a sense of purpose, a shared determination to protect their home. For the first time, humans and aliens worked side by side, united by the threat of annihilation. Then, the Zerathians arrived. The sky over Orpheus darkened as the massive alien ships descended. The first wave of attacks hit the planet's outer defenses, and the battle began in earnest. The Zerathians were as brutal as expected, their war machines cutting through Orpheus' defenses with terrifying precision. But Jonathan's alliance held strong. The Korans' technology, combined with the ingenuity of Orpheus' engineers, kept the planet's shields from collapsing under the onslaught. Talran fighters took to the skies, engaging Zerathian warships in fierce dogfights. On the ground, human and Talran forces fought side by side, holding back waves of Zerathian infantry that attempted to breach the settlements. The battle raged for hours, stretching into days. The losses were heavy on both sides, but Orpheus' defenders refused to yield. Jonathan was everywhere at once, coordinating efforts, rallying troops, and making sure that the fragile alliance between humans and aliens held. In the midst of the chaos, Jonathan found himself face to face with Cora, the Talran commander. She had been leading her troops on the front lines, her fierce presence inspiring those around her. But now, she stood at his side, her expression grim as they watched the Zerathian forces regroup for another assault. "They're relentless," Cora muttered, wiping blood from her brow. "But so are we." Jonathan nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We have to hold just a little longer." Suddenly, a Zerathian warship broke through the planetary defenses, its massive cannons trained on Orpheus' main settlement. Jonathan's heart raced. If that ship fired, it would be catastrophic. But before the warship could unleash its deadly payload, a squadron of Tallran fighters, supported by human drones, swarmed the vessel. In a breathtaking display of skill and teamwork, they disabled the ship's weapons and sent it spiraling into the atmosphere, where it exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Jonathan felt a surge of hope. They were doing it. They were winning. The final blow came when Vorak, the Koran leader, unveiled the last piece of their technological arsenal, a massive energy pulse that could disable the Zerathians' communications and disrupt their fleet's coordination. It was a risky move, but with the Zerathians on the brink of collapse, it was their best shot. The pulse was launched, and within moments, the Zerathian fleet fell into disarray. Their ships, no longer able to communicate with one another, became easy targets. One by one, they were picked off by Orpheus' defenders, until finally, the remnants of the Zerathian armada retreated into the darkness of space. The battle was over. Orpheus had survived. In the aftermath, the planet was scarred, but still standing. The human settlers, Korans, and Tallrans gathered together, their differences set aside by the shared experience of battle. Elise, once so rigid in her beliefs, stood before the crowd, her expression softened by the weight of the battle and its cost. "We wouldn't have made it without all of you," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "I see that now. Orpheus isn't just for USA, it's for all who seek refuge, who want to build something better. We have a future here, together." Jonathan stood in the crowd, watching as Elisa's words sunk in. It was the moment he had fought for, the vision he had held onto despite everything. Orpheus was no longer just humanity's last hope, it was a new beginning, a place where humans and aliens could rebuild, side by side. As the sun set over Orpheus, casting a warm glow across the battered landscape, Jonathan allowed himself a moment of peace. The journey had been long, the cost high, but they had survived. And now, for the first time in a long while, the future looked bright.